Great. Okay. Perfect. All right. So I have a few questions that I sent to you earlier, and it doesn't have to go in any specific order, but a lot of these questions are just out of my own curiosity, and I would love for us to imagine, and we should actually do this in the future. We should sit down and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and just relax and have a nice conversation. So I like to imagine that we're maybe sitting on a nice porch somewhere in Oakland, having a nice cup of coffee or tea and just having a morning chat. Would love to learn more about your journey in terms of finding out about Star King and ultimately what led you to make the decision to say yes to Star King and enroll.
Yeah, definitely. I always think the first time that I visited the Bay Area was probably in like maybe 2006 or 2007, and I remember staying at my friend's place who lived in the Albany-Berkeley border, and I just remember like knowing and feeling this call to Star King. I knew it was the West Coast Seminary, and I was a member of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Diego as a young adult. That was really the first Unitarian Universalist church that I participated in. That, at the time I was going, it was like a 600, 700 person church, the largest in the state. They had a very active people of color group. And, so I always felt really called. And so that first time I went to the Bay Area, I made my way over to Holy Hill at the Berkeley Graduate Theological Union. And just, I think the building was closed. I didn't really interact with anyone, but I walked around it. I remember just like touching the brick and where the spiral kind of was and just like crying and just like really feeling called. And so eventually, I graduated from the University of California, San Diego in 2008. Spent a few more years down there, and then my partner Noah and I moved to Oakland. You can see behind me the First Unitarian Church of Oakland. So that was the fall of 2010 that my partner Noah and I moved, to the Bay Area. That first weekend, we went to the First Unitarian Church of Oakland. It was Pastor Jacqueline Duhart at the time, our current spiritual care provider at Star King, and everything just kind of fit. It was Reverend Jacqueline's water communion, her first kind of Sunday in, and the following year in the fall of 2011 is when I first enrolled at Star King. And so I was my energy coming to Star King is that I was really burnt out from activism and from organizing. My first job after college was working on the No on Proposition 8 campaign. We were trying to make sure that gay marriage in California stayed. Of course, Proposition lost, and so we lost gay marriage, and then the Supreme Court came back. But in that fight, I mean, it's just I was working on electoral campaigns. That's actually the job that moved me up to Oakland is that I worked for the Gene Kwan for Oakland Mayor, or Oakland Mayor. And so I was a field organizer for the Gene Kwan for Oakland Mayor campaign, mostly working in District 6 and 7 in East Oakland. And so it was a multiracial opportunity to convince Black and Latino voters why they should vote for the first Asian American woman mayor. And I learned a lot of lessons. And I was exhausted after organizing for 8 years and just, especially in the campaign cycle, it starts in the summer, it ramps up towards November, November hits the election day, and then it just kind of drops in terms of, energy and activity. And it was
Yeah.
in kind of one of those drops that I was like, I knew that I needed some more strength, and I knew that I needed something to hold me and something to guide me. And I was getting it, from First Unitarian Church in San Diego. There was a people of color group there, and I remember talking to Reverend Dr. Arvid Strawberry, who was the minister at the San Diego church at the time, and he said something that was like, if you can do anything else, if there's other passions you want to explore those passions, try those things, and then kind of if nothing else really is, and then kind of come back to ministry. And so, yeah, after organizing, after kind of thinking, it always felt like becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister felt like the ultimate community organizing, kind of role. And so, in San Diego, I was working for a people of color nonprofit called the Coalition of Neighborhood Councils, and it was 20 different neighborhood councils, Black, Latino, Filipino kind of community, and it was one nonprofit. I really liked it, and I liked the work that I was doing, but it was very limited in terms of its geographical boundary, its scope. And then when I realized there was over 1,000 UU churches across the United States, and then to even learn, my first General Assembly at 2006 in St. Louis was where I learned about both Drum Diverse Revolutionary UU Multicultural Ministries, and it's also where I learned about the UU Church of the Philippines. And so once I realized at that General Assembly that I could be openly queer, I could, be multi-religious in UU, and I could someday serve as a minister with the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Philippines. It was those three kind of, my queer identity, my Filipino identity, and my faith all coming together. And, in that moment, that GA 2006 St. Louis, like I never looked back. And so
Mm.
since that time, kind of going from fall 2011 to 2016 at Star King, doing the Masters of Divinity program. I was kind of getting towards the end of my MDiv program, still feeling that I wasn't ready, that I wasn't cooked yet. And so I added the Master of Arts in Social Change. So it became for me, my studying at Star King was a 5 year, retreat, a 5 year blessing. It was a time in my life. I was kind of part-time working, but really it was mostly school, and it was just really transformative. I remember my first welcome with Ibrahim Baba Farajage, and it was Eid. We were celebrating the end of Ramadan after a month, and that was kind of this feast, this multi-religious, queer, people of color. I mean, everything about Star King just it calls me. It really calls me, and so yeah, after graduating with my mask and MDiv, I did a residency at the California Pacific Medical Center, and so really kind of got into chaplaincy. And that was the other thing. I think when I first came to Star King, I really thought I was, 100% on the parish ministry track. I wanted that Tulsa internship with, Tulsa's 2,000 member church. I wanted kind of, or the Portland internship, kind of these big churches in our faith. And yeah, I think as I learned about chaplaincy and I realized that you could have a whole career like listening and being there for people at times of need. And so um, all of a sudden this April I will have been a hospital or hospice chaplain for 7 years now. And so
Wow.
I've been working and what I didn't realize this before striking at all, but I love chaplaincy so much, especially because in the healthcare field, especially in the Bay Area, 90 to 95% of the people I work with are Filipino American. Nurses, board and care home facilities, just CNAs. I mean, healthcare system is full of Filipinos, and um, it allows me to be a Filipino American religious leader in a Filipino American setting, which is not possible in most of our UU churches. And so there's something about chaplaincy that has really fed me over these past 7 years that I'm gonna be, I think I told you this in another meeting, but I'm gonna be debt free by May because of, chaplaincy and because of the hard work that I've been putting into my budget, into saving, into not eating out, into, not doing that weekend trip. My partner and I got on this thing called the Ramsey Plan a few years ago, and I really thought I was going to be in loans for the rest of my life, paying the minimum payment. It was going to take 70 years at the plan that I had. And then we just had this shift in mindset where we just got really aggressive around our student loans. And my partner's already debt free. He has a advanced degree from Stanford, and I'm going to be debt free by May. And I'm so proud of that. And um, after I'm debt free in May, I save for 1 year, and then I'm off to serve the UU Church of the Philippines. by
Mm.
fall 2027. I'll be serving the EU Church of the Philippines, and yeah, everything's kind of leading towards that. And it feels like this. I mean, 2026 was almost, yeah, 18 years ago now. And so, 20, yeah, and Star King has always been at the center of it. Star King's been the core of my foundations. And I'm so excited to be teaching the Educating to Counter Oppressions course next semester. I have a new advisee student, and she lives in Redwood City, and so she's in the Bay Area, which was really exciting. We talked the other day, and yeah, Star King has given me so much, and I'm just excited to kind of deepen my commitment with Star King, going from an advising faculty to now a teaching faculty. Yeah, I know that was a very long answer for your first question.
Oh no, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Kevin, you have such an amazing journey that led you to Star King, but also that led you to the amazing, beloved work that you are doing to serve the UU community across the globe. I'm curious how your experience as a student, as an alum, and now as a faculty has kind of shaped maybe your thoughts on the future vision for Star King, because you have such rich experiences, and I want to kind of dig a little deeper there.
Yeah, I think I still feel that Star King is trying to redefine itself, in this. I mean, that's why I feel so blessed that, when I was there 2011 to 2016, I think that, the pandemic was like 2019, 2020. I mean, I was one of the last in-person classes, at the Graduate Theological Union. I mean, I had, best friends. The Pacific School of Religion was the dorms for all of the GTU. And so just hanging out at the dorms, late night conversations at the rooftop. The old Star King building was a two-story structure, and the basement kind of had the office lounge. And so, before finals or reading week, it'd be midnight. We're all, trying to finish papers together, and just um we also started a unofficial kind of UU fight club where we had boxing gloves and pads, and a lot of the military chaplains really liked it and were part of it, of course. And it just those things that happen in between classes and after classes, and so I think I was fortunate enough this past semester to take an in-person Star King class that met once a month in the building. And so there was a chance for me to, I just remember taking off my shoes and just kind of, Star King has always felt like holy ground. I remember every class in the fireside room, our shoes would be off. It was this sacred space. I mean, we were entering into, this really sacred threshold. And so I think when I came into Star King, I was really burnt out. I didn't have very strong spiritual practices. I didn't have a strong community. I was an organizer, but it often felt like I was individually organizing against oppression and not collectively organizing against oppression. And so over my Star King classes, I did an internship as the community advocacy intern at the Faithful Fools Street Ministry. Faithful Fools was introduced to me when I took Educating to Counter Oppressions with past president, Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, who co-taught it with Dr. Latini. And, to see what Unitarian Universalism looks like in the streets. And so to see it in the Tenderloin, to see poetry sessions and community. My organizing job was to do a Get Out the Vote campaign. And so it was a good transition because I was good at Get Out the Vote campaigns, but I had never done one from a faith-based perspective for folks that are homeless, that don't have addresses, that live in the SROs, 10 foot by I think 6 feet is their room, and it's just these places that are so challenging to live in. And so to kind of see a nonprofit that was working, that had funders, that got donations, that I preached a few times and got the generosity asked to go to the Faithful Fools. And so I think for me, my Star King through the internship process exposed me to the Faithful Fool Street Ministry, and that really gave me the foundations to see like, oh, okay, so we can have a faith-based nonprofit that can be funded, that can have newsletters, that has staff, that has a physical location. And so I think, that was really important for me to experience and to just kind of know. And especially along with all of the I we started an organization called Drum California in April 2023. Drum is diverse, revolutionary, Unitarian Universalist, multicultural ministries, and it's been around since 1997. Um, but Drum really only exists at the National General Assembly and virtually. And so what we did with Drum California is that we had an event at First Unitarian Church of Oakland behind me, where I'm a community minister. It was a Tuesday in April 2023, and we had 43 people come on a Tuesday to Oakland from all over the Bay Area for our first, Drum Bay Area gathering. And from that 43 people, it was clear that folks of color needed a space to be and to organize. And especially, with the foundations that educating to counter oppressions taught me and gave me, Star King and Eco and Dr. Parker and Dr. Latini, and they're all part of the foundations of Drum California. And so now we've had 11 quarterly retreats for people of color since then, over 200 people on our listserv. Last May, we expanded into Southern California, had 70 people come to the UU Church of Long Beach from all over, not only Southern California, people came from the Bay too. This winter retreat that's coming up at Davis, which thank you for your video. I haven't watched it yet, but I saw that you sent it to me. And we're probably going to get about 50 people of color UUs, to come all the way to Davis, California, for this big event. And this is my calling. I mean, I love my hospice job and I like the work that I do, but it's the work around Drum, California. And especially now in this time of fascism, in this time when, you know, Nicole Good was killed a few days ago in Minneapolis, shot cold murder in front of, hundreds of people. And we're living in some scary times, and I've never felt more important about the mission of our faith, the mission of Star King School for the Ministry, the mission of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland to build a radically inclusive community, anti-racist, anti-fascist, anti-oppressive. Um, our 1,000 churches have rainbow flags in front of them, have Black Lives Matter banners in front of them, and they've always felt important. But in this time of intense fascism, racism, homophobia, sexism, the values, everything we believe in, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, that's what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. And so somehow in the midst of chaos, we've built communities around us that are ready to organize, that are ready to stand up and Star King. I mean, it's, if there's a tattoo on my heart that has really been it's seen me, it's guided me through the advisors that I had at Star King, the people that I know, the relationships that I have in Unitarian Universalism. Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt was a faculty member of Star King before, and I preached at her old church, the UU Church in Fresno, a few in December, and oh my gosh, the Fresno UU Church, over 400 members, the most beautiful UU building I've ever seen. And it makes sense that, one of our strongest UU churches is in a very conservative, part of California. And so to kind of, we held a BIPOC caucus in Fresno after I preached there. We had 16 people come, BIPOC UUs. It was the largest people of color gathering I had been to at a church after I spoke. And it's those connections. People were like, "What? There's such a thing as Drum California. There's other UUs of color that are dealing with the same white supremacy culture that I'm dealing with." Um, and so yeah, we have monthly meetings with Drum California. We're having the retreat. Like my life is somehow blessed with UU people of color all around it. And I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but I've been very intentional in how I've built the organizing spaces around me. And Star King helped me realize that I don't have to do it alone. That this isn't something that should be done alone or can be done alone. It's a little egotistical to think you can do it alone. And so to kind of give me some humility, to give me some relationship building ideas. I mean, it's amazing how much chaplaincy and organizing go hand in hand. And so as I become a better listener, as I become a better chaplain, I become a better organizer. And all of that goes back to Star King.
Wow. That is just incredible in terms of your continuing journey now as an alum and faculty member and all the amazing experiences you've had and intentionally embraced within the state of California. I would also love to talk a little bit about your global footprint in terms of the Philippines. Can you tell us more about, or tell us a little bit more about how that relationship started and ultimately what brought you to decide to say yes to the commitment in fall 2027?
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. I mean, that's the thing. It's like when I look back on everything in my life, it Star King really, it's like it's the solid foundation for all this. The first time I went to the UU Church of the Philippines would have been probably 2012 or 2013. And at the time, Star King School for the Ministry had like it was some kind of scholarship that you could use. I remember you could either use it for like therapy or to like travel for like a UU event. And so I maxed out, my travel grant that year, and it sent me on a pilgrimage to the UU Church of the Philippines. It was with the San Mateo UU Church has had a long-standing relationship with the UU Church of the Philippines since about 2001. So they've had it for a long time. There's two amazing queer lesbian couple that have kind of been holding it down, and they visit every year in the Philippines. They've sent probably hundreds of students now to college, based upon their partnership with the San Mateo Church and the UU Church in Ulay in the Philippines. And I mean, I think in that first pilgrimage for me in like, yeah, 2013, 2014, to see the UU Church of the Philippines in person. I remember that first trip. I had got there a little early. My partner and I actually went, um, and the president of the EU Church, Reverend Henry Legahi, picked us up from the port, the boat port. You had to take a boat to get there on his motorcycle. And so the president of the EU Church of the Philippines on his motorcycle, my partner and I with our giant, travel backpacks ready for a couple weeks of travel, and just the feeling. And just that first trip to see our UU Chalice in these rural, I mean, so we have 25 churches in the Philippines. 24 of them are on one island, the island of Negros Oriental. One is in Metro Manila. And there's, they're beautiful, mostly rural, mostly rice planting communities, vegetable planting, farmers, substance off the land. Negros was a sugarcane kind of area for many years, still is now. And most of our UU churches are in a very kind of rural agricultural life. The Dumaguete Church, where the capital is, that's kind of the most maybe similar to what our UU churches would be in the US, kind of a nice big building. At the Dumaguete headquarters, they have a three-story structure called the Toribio Quimada Scholars Building, in honor of the founder of the UU Church of the Philippines, Reverend Toribio Quimada, who founded the church in 1955. His daughter, Reverend Rebecca Sienes Quimada, took over after her father was killed, for, a lot of the progressive organizing he was doing, actually. And so to meet, Reverend Rebecca, to meet her son, Reverend Mark Percy, he's a biology professor at Silliman University. We have about 3,000 Unitarian Universalists in the Philippines. And, it's a liberal religion. They're teaching our whole lives, the sexuality education, pro-LGBT, pro-women's rights. Very few churches are ordaining LGBT people, ordaining women, fighting for climate change. Some of our churches in the Philippines, one of them, the Kaikan Church, is climate change is about to, like, the church is right next to the water, and every year, every storm, it gets closer and closer and closer. And in the next few years, that church is going to be, very impacted by the seawater that's coming through. And so, the Philippines is on the front lines of climate change. It gets an average of 20 typhoons every single year. 20 typhoons. A few months ago, back in November, there was two typhoons that hit back to back. 10 out of our 25 churches were directly hit. And because we're organized, we started an organization called PUSO, which is Filipinx Unitarian Universalist Solidarity Organizing. And the idea was that we were organizing Filipino American Unitarian Universalists to be in solidarity with the UU Church of the Philippines. And so, because we had this monthly network in place, when those two typhoons hit, we were kind of ready to go. We were ready to go in terms of response. We got $2,000 raised from Fresno. We got $2,000 raised from San Francisco. Oakland pitched in $500. Of course, the UUA Disaster Relief Fund kind of kicked in. And so, we were able to really show that because of these networks, because so many of our churches post-pandemic just got really tech savvy, and so for me, once all of our churches got on Zoom, the next logical step was, well, let's do joint worship with the Philippines. Let's do joint worship with Transylvania, with India, with our global, UU partners. And I guess that kind of leads me to my other role with Star King is that I'm part of the Global Balish Scholars program. Last year, in September of 2025, well, actually, so yeah, the previous September, 2024, they sent me to Transylvania. I was one of the representatives to the fourth annual International Convocation for Unitarian Universalist Women. And so myself and a Star King student, Amy Burnell, was the two-person delegation from Star King to this global UU conference. It only happens, every 5 to 6 years. So it was a really rare moment to have Star King representation there. And 300 Unitarian Universalist Free Church people, from Japan to Brazil to, all over Europe, Australia, all over the US. I mean, I knew we had a global faith, and to feel it, to experience it, to see the chalice being lit, to meet all these Hungarian women that loved me and that I loved them, and that we had this shared faith and couldn't speak the same language, but it was this like we do have a 450-year-old faith. This is not something new, that's rooted in religious freedom and religious pluralism. And granted, the context, of faith is very different in each places. LGBT issues are not as strong in the Unitarian Church in Transylvania, and they know that they're working on that too. And it was really powerful to really realize and to see. We did a tour of some of the 450-year-old churches. The Unitarian churches often served as a fort, and so there's like several ringed walls behind it. We got to see this amazing statue of Francis David, who, in the Edict of Torda, Unitarians quote him for saying, "We need not think alike to love alike." And so to see the actual place, where the first patent for religious tolerance was passed, to see sort of the rock that Francis Davis stood on. It was the first time that religious freedom was enshrined into law, and it was this beautiful occasion where, if a village wanted to be Lutheran, it could be Lutheran. If it wanted to be Catholic, it could be Catholic. If it wanted to be Unitarian, it could be Unitarian. And so you have, hundreds of Unitarian villages where the whole village is Unitarian. Every person in that village, on Sunday morning is there. And yeah, something really shifted in me to realize that we do have a global UU faith, and it is connected. And the Philippines is probably, after England, after India has 10,000 UUs, I think England has about 60,000. And so the Philippines at 3,000 is kind of, one of the next largest numbers we have probably after India. And so I love global Unitarian Universalism. I got to meet a lot of the Northeast Indian folks, and it's amazing how Unitarianism got a hold, in South Asia. And so, yeah, I'm working closely with Esther McKerma. She's the coordinator at the Global Unitarian Universalist organization. They're restructuring what it means to do global Unitarian Universalism with the ARC, the Widening the Circle report. And so there was that institutional change report that was released by the Commission on Institutional Change, looking at anti-racism in every lens of what we do as the UUA, and it's especially in our global relationships. And so how do we not replicate imperialism and, colonization and, Americans telling people, oh, this is how it should be done. This is how it, but really, what would it look like to be in partnership with India, with the Philippines, with justice at the forefront, with equity at the forefront, with transformation, generosity, pluralism at the forefront. and to really, create some really meaningful relationships. Now that our churches are online, Star King's online, that there's ways, how can we continue to serve the needs, especially in the Philippines, especially in even in Kenya, they really need religious education. They need a lot of religious education. And so, what would it look like to support, churches from Kenya to Uganda to the Philippines to India? I really believe that, part of Star King's mission and goal, we've had the Balish Scholars for over 25 years. We've had someone from Transylvania study at Star King every year. And so we're really trying to reimagine, what would it look like for a Transylvanian scholar and a Philippine scholar to join us online in our online classes? And then maybe how could we get them physically to symposium in August? How could we get them to General Assembly, 2027 GA San Jose? I mean, I hope that both Drum California and Star King are all over that GA. There hasn't been a GA in California since 2004 in Long Beach. And so what does it mean? What would it mean that GA is 30 minutes south of Star King, and it is, I mean, on the drum side, I know we're going to be a big part of it too. So I'm really excited to kind of have those conversations because I think if we plan it right and if we make the right asks, like it can be a really big GA for us. Fundraising wise, organizational capacity wise. I mean, a lot of things can happen at GA, and especially it being in California. So we have like a year and a half to plan. It's June 2027, but I hope we can really make the most. I mean, the biggest one I went to was Portland, in like 2017, had like 10,000 people there, like from all across the US. So yeah, I'm excited about that possibility and yeah, to continue to improve on both what Star King's trying to do and Drum California as well.
Amazing. I'm curious how your experiences perhaps shape your approach to teaching. You mentioned that you'll be teaching the eco course this coming spring term. How do you approach teaching based on all of your experiences as a student, as an alum, as
Yeah,
a global UU? Yeah.
definitely. I think I always tell my sister this too. She was in a grad program. And it, the biggest thing that grad programs I feel like give us is relationships. Like that's one of the key key things. And so as I was approaching the eco course, I reviewed Dr. Parker's syllabus, Dr. Latini's syllabus, Dr. Stephanie's syllabus, and kind of they all kind of encouraged me to review everything and make it your own. Teach from where your passion is and from where you're excited. And so in addition to all of how they've taught the class in the past, my approach was to kind of bring in a number of guest lecturers. And so, the more, I just think the more that our students can know, who's who in the UUA, who's doing what. I mean, I have a perspective, on what it means to kind of, to organize and to counter oppressions from my perspective, but I really wanted them to kind of hear from, some amazing, like multiple, sources and speakers. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited that we have this very robust preaching or not preaching, but like guest minister schedule. We're gonna have my Unitarian, the leader of the global Unitarian Universalist movement is Reverend Zolt Elkis. He's a Meadville graduate, one of the few, Transylvanian leaders that has a U.S. based degree. He's now the chaplain for the Unitarian High School in Cluj-Napoca and also the leader of the global UU movement. So he's kind of our first guest lecturer. We have Reverend Barb Grebe, who was the past chair of, the Board of Trustees for Starting School for the Ministry, founded Trust, Transgender Religious UU movement. And so we're going to, hear from his perspective. Reverend Rama Hamami, who is just this rock star organizer involved in the Bay Area, especially around interfaith movements for Palestine against ICE. She's going to be coming Reverend Joseph Santos Lyons, who's the drum community minister. My pretty much my personal mentor that Reverend Joseph Santos Lyons was the first person at St. Louis to ask me if I ever considered ministry. And
Mm.
I never would have thought about it unless someone asked me. And so I think it's that powerful. Like if you see a young person, if you think they could be good, like ask them if they've ever considered ministry, like, and so that was Joseph Santos Lyons for me. Reverend Matthew McHale, the minister at the San Jose Church, coming from a white allies perspective. We have Reverend Natalie Brewster Nguyen, who's part of the Justice Movements, a consulting trainer that Drum uses. And then we close with Reverend Michael Crumpler, who's the multicultural LGBT staff for the UUA. And so it's a very like, I mean, I was just kind of thinking like, who do I know that students should know? And who can I be connected that students should be connected? And sure, I have all these ideas about educating to counter oppression, but to just kind of get multiple perspectives, cultures, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, like all of that is countering oppression. And so it's kind of, I think I joked to one of the students that eco kind of feels like Harry Potter's like defense of the dark arts, so it's like, we have a lot to defend against. And so I felt that, I wanted students to not just have my voice, but to really have this community of voices. And then, now that once they're alumni, they know Barb Grieve, they know Michael Crumpler, they know Joseph Santos Lyons, they know Ranois. And that if that can be one more step in their career, I just that's how I organize in a community, I lead in community, and so I wanted to teach this class in community. And so yeah, looking forward to that a lot. It's going to be such a powerful experience. My last semester at Star King, I was a Hilda Mason fellow. And so I taught this class called I think it was towards an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural Unitarian Universalism, anti-racist theologies and praxis. And it pretty much is very similar, to kind of the eco course in this course that I'm teaching now. But since I taught that course, that would have been spring semester 2016. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to teach officially at Star King as a faculty. And so I'm like pinching myself, that in a few weeks this class starts and I will be a faculty at Star King School for the Ministry, which is um, just the biggest honor of my life. Yeah.
Wow. That is truly wonderful. And so just beautiful to hear how you have really rooted your approach to teaching this course in the history, in terms of looking at Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker's syllabi and Reverend Dr. Gabriella Latini, and then putting your own spin on it. Which leads me to kind of a tangential question, and that is, as a student, your first experience with ego, and now looking at it from you as a faculty member, imparting the wisdom to students, have you seen ego change or morph or transform to the present times in which we apply it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Yeah, I mean that's interesting because I feel like, every reiteration of anti-racism, in the UUA, it's different and it's always contextual and there's different things going on. I think in the early days, maybe in like 2010, 2012, there was a big emphasis on the journey towards wholeness. And so, I know at Oakland we had a Journey Towards Wholeness committee. It had like 13, 14 members. It was very active and its role was to anti-racism, anti-oppression. And so, from everything from a wheelchair ramp to religious education, to how are we funding community ministries. Now Journey Towards Wholeness isn't really around anymore. They don't really have Journey Towards Wholeness things. We've gone through a Jubilee, used to be the anti-racism trainings, Jubilee 1, there was Jubilee 2. I remember doing that. Then it became kind of Mosaic, which it's kind of still around now as well. I know in 2017 there was these big white supremacy teach-ins after a woman of color, was not chosen for a job that she was well qualified for in the UUA, and a white man was chosen over her. There was a real reckoning across the UUA for, you know, every institution in America is rooted in white supremacy culture. Our Unitarian Universalist faith is not an exception. I mean, from slavery, to Unitarians were instrumental in colonizing both Hawaii and the Philippines. It was led by white men Unitarians that were trying to save, white man's burden, save people of color from themselves. And so, I mean, our faith needs to reckon with this, needs to reckon with white supremacy culture. And so, eco educating to counter oppression does need to change and does need to remain relevant. I know last year, yeah, they brought in some just kind of concepts around ice raids, and immigration, and how what is the religious response to that now. One of the things that I'm excited about for bringing in, I probably can't see it, but the UUA current book, the current global global read or communal read is Social Change Now, a guide for reflection and connection from Deepa Iyer. And so it's going to be one of the core books that I'm reading. And what I really think it's important is because it kind of breaks social justice organizing down into 12 sort of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different kind of maps. And so there's guides, there's weavers, there's visionaries, there's caregivers, there's disruptors, there's healers, there's storytellers. And what I love about the Common Read is that it's very accessible, and it's one of those things that I want students to know that there's a place for everyone in this movement. There's a place for everyone in this fight. I mean, and I'm kind of like, the outgoing, loud preacher, and that's one way of being in the fight, but it's definitely not the only way of being in the fight. There's healers, there's experimenters, there's builders, there's caregivers, there's disruptors, there's weavers, there's guides, there's elders. Like, there's so many roles in the movement. And so that's one example of how I'm bringing, kind of how we respond now, to what's going on, in, with all the foundations we've had in the past, but then also making sure that, um, yeah, we're looking at our systems. We're looking at, where white supremacy culture still is. What are the shifts that we can make? What are the conversations we can have? What are the relationships we can build that are only possible in this moment? And then, maybe, in a few months, in the next year, the needs of the moment will change, and so we can only kind of respond to what we have now. But yeah, there's definitely a lot. I think we're still trying to figure out how do we work, with our identities as people of color? What do we need from white allies? What does it look like, with Nicole Good, passing. I know a lot of my being murdered, a lot of my colleagues are kind of upset at their congregations because it's like, oh, now you're upset. Like a white woman died, now you're upset. What about the hundreds of black and brown folks that have been killed at ICE for years? I mean, even this year alone, Keith Porter was a black man that was killed by ICE. He's not getting as much attention as Renee Good. And it also reminds me, when Reverend James Reeb was killed in Selma, Alabama in March 1965. James Reeb was the minister of the All Souls Unitarian Church. James Reeb was killed as a white male pastor, and that's what got America all mad. And and then, I mean, the civil rights voting rights legislation passed because of James Reeb's death, because white America realized how fucked up the situation was, and woke up to that moment. And so it feels like we're in that moment now. It feels like, in the middle of December, about Tuesday, December 16th, I was part of an amazing organizing effort with 250 faith leaders from across the Bay Area. And we shut down ICE's headquarters, District 9, from San Francisco to Bakersfield. 44 ministers chained themselves to ICE's building, to ICE's door, and we were not letting anyone, in this building. We shut down ICE's headquarters that day. There were no abductions, no deportations that day. I mean, it was, the next day operations resumed and things happened. We didn't, block it indefinitely. And it showed, it was the first time that we had, a series of roles. We had people that, white folks that had a lot of privilege that could be arrested were on the front lines as the 44 people getting arrested. Folks of color, immigrants, people that couldn't risk that had other roles. I was part of the media role. We had a music team. We had a rally for 9 hours straight, singing and chanting and preaching. And we wanted to make sure that we were there until every single person got out of that building that was arrested. And so it really I was so proud of that moment. And it was Unitarian Universalist ministers that were leading it. that were getting arrested, that were organizing it from the top up, to the person like everywhere. We had dozens of our faith leaders in action. And for me, that's the best. That's the best of who we are. In times, of fascism, in times of racism, in times when people of color are being abducted for looking like people of color. I've never been more proud of our Unitarian Universalist values, of our faith, of our community. We're who knew this was what it was going to be like in January 2026. But we're here, we're ready. I'm ready, and yeah, I'm really excited to kind of keep the momentum going and to keep the building going.
Yeah. Wow, what a proud moment. That is really, really impressive and just speaks volumes to what we can do together. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So, a lingering question that I have is what advice would you offer to someone that's considering going into ministry or religious leadership or chaplaincy and thinking about pursuing that at Star King?
Yeah, definitely. It always felt that, seminary always felt like it was a deconstructing, it was kind of like, I mean, because I was there for 5 years, it felt like a 5 year retreat. It felt like this 5 year retreat where I got to like really figure out, okay, like where am I? What do I need to let go of? What is no longer serving me? And what am I calling towards? What do I want to build around? And I think like when I think about the life and the network that I have, I would encourage students to reach out, to those organizers, to those leaders, to those ministers that, and have that one-on-one, have a Zoom call, have a coffee date. I think when times get hard, like I have a community of religious professionals of color that I can turn to. I have someone's number. I mean, this happened this past year. I had my closest friend in the world, my best friend, passed away on April 8th this past year, Anthony Francesco Nicolau Bigatti. And, those first people that I called were UU ministers of color, queer UU ministers of color that I knew could hold my tears from their experience as a queer minister of color, and to have that person to turn to, um, and I think my mentor minister just said something like, I hear your tears and they're all over me and I feel them, and it was just this like create those relationships, like use Star King, to reach out to people. Hey, I'm a student, I'm trying to learn about this. My student Ronnie, this past semester did a skill course where they were looking at how progressive religious movements, shape society and shape what's going on. So I mean, I think the project got a little out of hand, but they ended up interviewing like I think 10 to 12 people, and had, recorded sessions. I mean, they have enough for a book now, but it's like those things like that, those relationships, and especially being in seminary, there's a time where it's like, oh yeah, 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 like you're in seminary, let me help you out. Like there's that reason, kind of an excuse. It's maybe a little awkward if you were just randomly calling out of the blue, but if it's for a project, if it's for an essay, or if it's for a, whatever, assignment or something, then it's like, oh yeah, I'll help a student, out. I think that's important. I just kind of, yeah, we come with a lot, and it's not necessarily like leave what you have at the door, but like be willing to let go of what needs to let go too. And I think there are some students, that are challenged by the educating to counter oppressive curriculum. I'm thinking of like cisgender white male students, in particular, sometimes just, it's hard to see the water that you're swimming in, and so being gentle and meeting people where they're at. And what I love about our striking classes is that the students learn so much from each other, and so you have such a, some students maybe are, very, well progressed in their anti-racist, anti-fascist, anti-oppressive life and ministry. And for some students, this might be the very first time that they've thought about privilege and oppression. And, the best of Unitarian Universalism is something that can hold both those spaces. How do we have entry points for new people. I mean, I remember being, yeah, I remember being, when I grew up in high school, I went to I would say it was a diverse high school, but it was predominantly white, and I because of a lot of colonization in the Philippines, and then how that translates to sort of internalized racism in America, like I pretty much mostly had white friends. I pretty much, thought I was white. I never, you know, I mean, we had the American flag after 9/11. We tried to, my parents, spoke English to me and didn't want me to learn my native language. And it was assimilate, assimilate, assimilate as much as possible, and if I went to college, thinking, that I was going to become like a politician, or like, kind of run for mayor or supervisor someday. And thank God that UC San Diego had, amazing ethnic studies classes, a cross-cultural center, LGBT resource center, women's center. It's actually where I met my partner Noah, was through the cross-cultural center. We're going to be celebrating 20 years in February and getting married in Salt Lake City on February 22nd. And yeah, I'm really excited about that, and it's really the culmination of Noah and I and our closest friends that we have now met in this cross-cultural center, women's center, ethnic studies kind of space, and to kind of have ethnic studies UC San Diego come into my life as the same time as the First Unitarian Church of San Diego and Drum. I was able to kind of take the ethnic studies I was learning and practice it in the Drum community. And then once college was gone and I graduated, it left Drum as the main space that I could organize as a person of color, as a queer person, as intersectional identity, as a multi-religious faith person. And so, all of that to say, I think there is, yeah, a real opportunity to figure out, who you are, who you want to be, what's no longer serving you, and then, reaching out. And then those students that you meet, I mean, like the students that I knew at Star King, they're ministers now, they're organizers now, they're chaplains now. Whenever you need a job reference, if you're looking for a job, I mean, it's those networks. And I think with Star King being mostly an online seminary now, I think it's extra important for students, to make that connection. If there's someone in your class that, you want to get to know them, reach out to them. Say, hey, can we have a Zoom chat, for an hour? What are you doing Friday night at 6, or however we can do that. I really hope to have more in-person events at Star King in the building, getting students there. I hope to teach some of my educating to counter oppression course from the Star King office itself in the building. I'm excited to connect with the student in Redwood City. I think Star King, when it was at the Graduate Theological Union, was very rooted in the Bay. Like we were the leader when George Floyd died. It was Star King students that blocked off the freeway. Like I mean, it was thousands of students protesting, and it was ministers with Star King stoles. We had milk of magnesia blessed by Reverend Dr. Rosemary for when they would tear gas us. I mean, we were the headquarters, for leading the Graduate Theological Union when, so I hope that Star King can be, in the protest and the action and what's going on. And we have such amazing faculty, alumni, and staff ministers all over the United States that love Star King just as much as you and I. And it's like, how can we tap into their expertise and their relationships and their knowledge? Because Star King has, I mean, we've been around since 1904. We are the West Coast Seminary. There's only two UU. And so we have such an amazing reputation. And I think we could leverage that better, especially to do local, kind of local stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I really value and appreciate your vision and how rooted it is in your own lived experience, which has been just incredible. If you don't mind my saying, I know we just have just a few more minutes together, and I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish that I would have that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think the one I do hope that we can like start a really active student of color caucus at Star King. I know we've had one in the past. I know Chris Long used to be really active around like a student of color cohort. And especially with all the work that we're doing with Drum California, I think if there's a way that we can get Star King students of color tapped in to the statewide movement, I mean, we're connected to almost every major church in the state. And also like it's such a good way for preaching opportunities. I preach about 2 to 3 times a month, and I know our Star King students are always looking for those opportunities. Most of the people in Drum California are board presidents, are leaders of their churches. They're people that can get them, into Mount Diablo, into San Francisco, into Long Beach, and so, yeah, I would love to help support like a really active student of color. As I was shadowing a lot of different courses this past fall, and I was like, oh, we have a number of students of color at Star King. Like, have we ever got together officially, as a community, worship together, be together? And so that would be like I think I told the teeny this, kind of last semester, but I would love to help, launch, start one. I mean, ideally the students are kind of running it themselves, but I would love to help launch one and start one for Star King students. That would be amazing.
Oh, that would be amazing for sure. And you're right, we do have many students of color that are leaders and have passion and commitment to the work that we do for sure. Kevin, Reverend Kevin, thank you so much for your gift of time, your wisdom, your shared experience. I just can't say enough. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and I hope it's just the start of our many conversations that we will have. But thank you so much for contributing and participating in the President's Porch, this little blog that I've got started. And